Hey everybody, in this video I want to talk about the concept of Newlines. I'm going to reintroduce it. We've already talked about it before, but I'm also going to introduce a concept called casting. And casting is a very useful tool in many circumstances, but not necessarily in all circumstances. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this idea of being able to introduce new lines. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and I will say copy. And I'm going to, again, I'm in the introduction to strings. I'm under line 24, which is going to be part of the new lines conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and you can see that the print function is interpreting these values right here as carriage returns. Now, when we look and work with our resources, carriage returns mean something to print. If I come over here and I were to just simply set this as a variable, so let me up arrow here, and what I'll do is I'll go over here and make a variable for, we'll call it x equals. So that's going to be in my assignment operator, and then I'll come over here and I'll just set that value here for, now making it a string. So if I say type, and we look at x, it's a string. And if I type x, if I use x, it's just going to print everything to include the new lines. However, print is a function. So anything that's in the quotation marks, or in the parentheses, excuse me, is going to actually be executed under the function. So if I say print and just hit enter here, we'll say it's a built-in function. Now, as such, what it's doing is it's actually reading the content between the delimiters, between the single quote delimiters that we have in our configuration. And again, just keep in mind that when we do make the choice of implementing these things, it's basically just for the idea of formatting. Now, I'm going to talk later on about how to overcome some of these issues, because what if /n was actually part of my output and I did actually want it to see or to print? We're going to talk about ways that we can actually escape and tell the system to basically ignore one, more, or all of these new lines. And there's a few ways to be able to do that. Now, the other part of this that I wanted to talk about was this idea of casting. So if I come over here and say A equals, and I'll say 10, and I'll say B equals 10, what we've got here is a very interesting scenario, because A is a string, or is an integer. I'm sorry. A is an integer, and B is a string. And if I try to do my math, if I say x equals A plus B, I can't do it, because it says specifically I'm trying to do a plus operation, which would be a mathematical operator for an integer, or the plus would be a concatenation operation for a string, so we can't do this. So what I want to do is I want to cast. Now, casting is going to be taking one data type and making it another data type. So if I came over here and I decided that I wanted to do this, what I could do is I could say x is going to equal A plus B. But we already know that B is a string, seen here. B is a string. However, what I can actually do is I can actually come in here and say that I want to change B to an integer. So remember, int is a function. So if I come over here and say int, it's a class by itself. It's not a function, it's an actual class. So what I'm doing is I'm saying take and use the class int as a function, and take anything that is in the variable for B, in the value of B, in the variable of B, and turn it into an integer. So notice it took that. If I type x, my value here is going to be 10 plus 10. If I do the same thing for a multiplication operation, it's going to work perfectly fine. If I print x, it should be 100. So the main objective here is to understand that I have the capability of not only being able to have data types, I can actually move between data types. As an example, what would happen here if I said x equals, and I said int of b, x is now going to equal 10. What if I said x equals the float of b? X now equals a float. It adds the decimal point value to it. Another thing that I could also do is I could turn B into A, or A into a string. So if I said A, I'll just say A equals the string A. Now if I say A and B, notice they both have the single quotes, so that tells me that they're obviously strings. Now if I say X equals A plus B, I should end up with a value of 1010. So these are very, very useful tools that you may or may not end up working with. However, it's not a catch-all. So as an example, if I say A equals Terry, which we know beyond a shadow of a doubt is a string, and I make the decision that X is now going to equal the integer cast of A, and hit enter, it can't do that. Why? Because it's not a base T variant. It's an alphanumeric string. So as an example, let's say I had a value. So let's say A equals, and I come over and I say 1,000, or 100,000, and I say A. It's a string. Well, when I try to cast it, it can't do it, again, because it's not a base value, base 10 value. And I couldn't turn it into a float for the same reason. Because can't turn it into a string, or can't convert a string into a float. Now, it's interesting the way this works, because I may actually have read this value. So as an example, I could say execute a show command, and whatever the output is, place it into a particular variable, and that variable would be a string in this instance. And later on, I might want to or need a portion of this. And what I can do is I can actually manipulate this variable, and I can then pull what I need out of it. And I can do that through a process that's referred to as indexing and slicing. And we're going to entertain that in the next video, where I'm going to show you how I can have a string and I can look at specific portions of that string. Now, this is not something that we do a huge amount when we're working with networking in Python. We will do slices and we will look at indexes, especially when it comes to lists. But this is an excellent place to be able to introduce it, because it gives me the capability of introducing the concept behind how indexing works and what an actual slice is. Because as we saw, I had that value of 100,000 with an A at the end of it. And I could not convert that to an integer or to a float because it had that alphanumeric string in it. But if I could actually focus on only the numeric portion of the string, I should ultimately be able to come up with a result that will actually work inside of the confines of my Python language. So in the last few videos, we've created a script, we've executed that script, we have looked at how to execute functions in that script, and we have looked at the values for strings, how they are assigned, how we can concatenate, how we can cast them into other values, and the impact that may have in our infrastructure and in our actual code. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a cap on our conversations now at this particular point. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the idea of indexes and slices in the next video. Again, focusing on strings. I'm Terry Vinson, and I'd like to thank you for learning Python with me.